Welcome to the 2024 Annual Action Plan public hearing. We're excited to be presenting the draft plan that the city's Housing and Community Vitality Department has put together. We started this process with some, we do consultation throughout the year with agencies and advocates, and then in October, we held 2 public listening sessions to really hear from folks about what needs they were hearing, and we did a survey. You'll hear about a lot of that in this presentation, and utilize that to help us draft our plan for how the city will utilize our this community. So that's what we're all here for. So if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. My name is Barb Van Hoy, and I am the policy analyst with the Housing and Community Vitality Department. I'm just realizing that I can also share my video, I think. Does that show if that? Okay, great. So I was like being able to see people too, to connect a little bit more in person. Before we dive into all of the detail of the action plan, I did want to just do a couple of reminders for the online meetings to make sure everyone who's joining digitally or by phone knows how to participate. On Teams, we really encourage you to raise your hand, use the reactions, do use the chat function. You can ask questions in the chat, and we have some staff who can both possibly answer the question for you in chat, or they will let me know and want me to get a question for everyone. And also, please do tell us your name and your neighborhood, or your zip code, or if you're with an organization, we really like to also just be aware of who is here. And then also Teams allows the possibility, the ability for you to turn on live captions. And the way you do that is with the more button, and then you hit language and speech, and you can turn on live. For any of you who are joining us by phone this evening, you will be speaking questions and comments, and if you're on the phone, you can unmute or remute yourself by pressing the we also have, we'll be making the slides available. There's a couple of handouts, but they are just some of the slides that you'll see in the presentation. And there's the website that you can go to find them for the meeting. And then if all the questions, please reach out. We are always happy to hear from your and questions. And there's a QR code for our newsletter. You can sign up for our email newsletter that goes out a couple of times a month. So want to introduce your presenters and our staff. So again, I'm Barb Van Hoy. We'll also be here who is programs manager. And we have just helping to support the meeting, Paul Morrow, who's senior analyst, Ray Medina, analyst 1, and Holly Robertson, who's business partner. And just a reminder, we finally learned to say it quickly off the tongue that instead of Community Development Division, we are now the Housing and Community Vitality Department, which is one of the changes that Mayor Lenny Regalado made once he came in, really elevating the importance of housing issues. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to explain the annual action plan. Please feel free to interrupt and say, what does that acronym mean? Because the longer we do this, the longer I do this, the harder it is to remember to not leave acronyms in. And I'm always happy to explain them. So we'll talk about what that plan is, what's in the plan, which essentially is what's the budget, what are the grants and funds the city receives. Mostly this is funds through the Housing and Urban Development, Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then what are the priority needs and how we're planning to allocate those funds. And then we want to hear your questions and your ideas and your feedback. And also make sure you know how you can follow the process and what the timeline is. So, as I mentioned, the annual action plan is focused on how we allocate the city's grants that come through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So that's HUD. When we say HUD, And these grants are actually allocated as entitlement grants. Every community in the United States that has 50,000 or more residents is entitled to receive these funds. And each one of these three grants has a separate set of guidelines for what kinds of things a city can use this funds for. Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, that is the most flexible. It can be allocated for many different uses. The Home Investment Partnerships Program is very much focused on housing, developing housing, rehabilitation, and rental assistance. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant is focused on responding to and preventing homelessness. All of these grant funds, we have to demonstrate to HUD that they primarily support people who are low and moderate income. You'll see LMI, that means low and moderate income communities. And the definition of low and moderate income is calculated every year by HUD. And so it has to do with a percentage of area median income. So what's not the average, but the median, and people who are at 30% of the median income, or 50% of the median income, or up to 80% are considered low and moderate. So utilizing these funds comes with a requirement, a very smart requirement, that we do a lot of planning. And so we are in, so what are the participation, and then we put together every 5 years a consolidated plan. And this year's annual plan for 2024 is going to be the 5th and final year of the consolidated plan. And then every year we update it. We look at what things are changing. Are there new needs and new conditions that would have us change some of the plans that were part of the 5-year plan? And then that's what we're doing now. Our program year runs from April 1st to March 31st. And every year we produce a performance evaluation report, another acronym, we call it the CAPER. It's not a cute little salty so the timeline for the action plan, you are here in January. As I mentioned, we did some listening sessions, we got lots of input, we drafted the plan, and now we're in the a little bit toward the end of the 30-day public comment period. You can download the whole plan on our website, and we will be taking feedback and input until the last day of that public comment period, which is January 17th. And then that plan will go to the council. They will consider it and opportunity for input if you want to do council and be there as well. And the program year begins, and then we also will be putting out notices of funding opportunities. So just a few notes about some things that are new this year. You might have heard some of this in our earlier hearings. Housing and homelessness have been top priorities for our new Mayor Yemi Mobolade and our vision with all the GA departments. Also last year, the voters of Colorado, I guess now it's year before last, now that we're in 2024, passed Proposition 123, which is going to be making available about $300 million a year to communities in Colorado for affordable housing and related. So we're very much working hard to position the city to receive some of those funds. We also welcomed the new Community Development Advisory Committee. And welcome, thank you, David Lord, who's here. He's the chair of that. And the mayor is also convening some solutions teams, one on housing and another one on specifically to homelessness. As this is his first year, he's working on really getting a lot of input and putting a lot of thought into developing some new plans. And then we'll also today with an update on homework ARP funds, which were allocated a couple of years ago and will need the same needs. So here's the expected budget. Every year we have to guess how much is going to be allocated in the new funds. So all of this is dependent on Congress to pass their budget. We expect to receive approximately $5.7 million from the 3 grant programs, CDBG at 3.2 million, Home Investment Partnerships Program at 1.8 million, and the Emergency Solutions Grant is the smallest one. We also have additional funds that basically are fees or payments on some of the past housing loans, and we're able to reinvest those funds into these programs as well. That's program income. If you see PI, it's not like Magnum PI. That's what I used to think when I saw it. That PI stands for program income. So in the consolidated plan, the 5-year plan, lots and lots of research and work went into identifying the priority needs for our community within what these HUD grants can fund. And at that time, we identified these 5 priority needs: affordable housing, human services. HUD uses the term public services, but we use human services because it has a little more public recognition. And then homelessness prevention, public facilities and infrastructure, and economic development. So all of the allocations and priorities that we utilize come under those headings. And so the way this year, based on all of the input and knowledge and consultations, in our plan this year, we are proposing to allocate the funds as you see on this slide. So affordable housing is the biggest. And that definitely tracks with, what we know is happening in our community as well as that we receive from the focus. So the affordable housing funds include CDBG and home. And then human services, you'll sometimes see that again as public services. We're limited in the amount of funds we're allowed to use for that. That's 9%. For infrastructure and facilities, we have done a lot of projects over the last 3 years, and I guess I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But homelessness prevention, again, we're somewhat limited because this G grant is the smallest one we received, and this year we have zeroed out the economic development portion for the 2024 fund because we have met and exceeded our 5-year goal for economic development. And we do still have some funds from previous years available, and we will be continuing to look for eligible projects for which we can use those. So it doesn't mean we're not doing any, but we've really reallocated somewhat this year to focus even more on affordable housing as much as we can. And then, of course, administration as well. And those are limited by federal regulations. So just to kind of break down some of the overall goals, as I mentioned, housing is and affordable housing is really, has been really important, but it becomes even more important with the changes in our community. And some of the individual goals under that we are prioritizing, sometimes with funds, a lot of times with the work that our staff is doing, is to help figure out family shelter and also respite care shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness but have serious medical issues that in some cases makes it difficult for them to even utilize the shelter that we have. And of course, rental assistance, the need for that is really growing. Homelessness and housing support services is among those top goals. And this year, our staff has also been working on an anti-displacement toolkit with also some organizations and as housing becomes more expensive, often we are concerned about whether people with lower incomes in neighborhoods are displaced by housing prices or values going up. And so our staff is working on helping to protect people from that. And then the senior center, that is sort of the main identified priority for facilities this year. In the last 10 years or so, the Community Development Division and now Housing Department has really allocated a significant amount toward upgrading our community centers, making them more ADA accessible. And we've been upgrading the accessibility of city bus stops in the lower income communities. And the senior center is a great way for us to utilize those facilities funds to create better accessibility and programs for low and moderate income communities. So this slide, I am not going to describe everything in it. Believe it or not, this is a simplification of the AP 38 as a section in the plan. For those who are not familiar with the action plan, structure of it is prescribed by HUD. We basically have to, put numbers in boxes and identify very specific elements. And so what this slide gives you a sense of is sort of how some of the grant programs are sliced and diced. So for example, under CDBG housing programs, this is the percentage of CDBG funds we're allocating. The number of people we project will be served by them, and some examples of what kinds of activities we can utilize the funds for. So this is something you can take home and look at on the web if you want to spend more time with it. But it basically shows you CDBG has housing programs, public services or human services, public facilities and infrastructure, and then economic development. And then the home program focused on developing and preserving affordable housing. And then it also has some rental assistance. Also, due to some HUD restrictions, we are transferring funding for homeownership assistance, which we recognize is still very important. And you see here, 0% under home. It doesn't mean that we're not supporting homeownership. It's just that the funding for that work is going to be included under CDBG this year. And we're also looking for more organizations that can help support that. Those of you who watch the home buying market, you know how difficult it is right now, not just with the prices, but also with the interest rates. So we're trying to get more creative to help us. And then the USD funding test, in Ferguson. Those funds are restricted to being allocated for shelter support, database information, rapid rehousing, and also some administration. So a little bit more about sort of how to read the plan, if you want to delve more into it. Again, as I mentioned, it's in the format required by HUD. And 1805 is the section of the executive summary. There's a little more deeply into the 5-year plan, the consolidated plan, under which this annual plan falls. And it also goes into a little more detail about the priority needs and goals. Also, if you are you really want to know that on this stuff, the consolidated plan is available on our website as well. And there's lots of kind of studies in there about our community and needs and all that. One thing that will be happening this year, as well as just allocating and managing our 2024 funds, is we will be working on putting together our next 5-year plan. So there'll be more opportunities for folks in the community to participate and add their voices to what we put together for the next 5 years. So then the AP 20 is the section in the plan that enumerates the annual goals and objectives. That's the shorter list. And then the AP 38 is a longer list. And much more information about each of the projects and how the funds are allocated. And then there's a section specifically on affordable housing where we enumerate specifically what are the specific way that HUD wants us to count number of people we expect to serve with rehabilitated housing, with new builds, with rental assistance. And then throughout the community, there's also a lot of narrative that goes into more detail about the projects that we've started working on, that we're continuing, or the projects that we're doing. Also, a lot of work that the city is engaged in that is not specifically just the HUD funds. So a lot of our staff is also involved in doing a lot of projects, trying to move forward agendas around affordable housing in ways that is outside of but still related to how we spend the HUD grants. And this is the slide that Catherine Duarte, who's our HUD programs manager, is going to describe. I forgot to double check that she's on. I bet she is. And Catherine, if you're there, can you unmute yourself?
Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. The home ARP update is there's not a ton of information on it in the 2024 action plan. That's because this program is wrapped up in our 2021 action plan. It's kind of forever tied to that. So when we say home ARP, we're basically referring to the extra allocation that we got from HUD as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act 2021. We didn't get access to those funds until 2022 when we did a public planning process on how to use those funds. And they're really specific. It's like a blend of our ESG program, which is for homeless people at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness, and our home program, which is really all about creating housing. It's focused on creating stable housing options for people experiencing homelessness, and we have until 2029 to fully spend that. We've separated our plan, our funds into a handful of buckets: rental assistance, non-congregate shelter, permanent affordable housing, and planning funds, capacity building and administrative support for organizations taking on those projects. So in the last year, we started a tenant-based rental assistance program with the Housing Authority. They match people exiting homelessness with housing resources and pay their rent for up to 2 years. And we also identified eligible permanent supportive housing projects that we can support. We're not identifying them yet because they're still in the development phase. In the coming year, we will be making moves to operationalize capacity building funds, some of those funds to help organizations plan capital projects. We see a need for non-congregate shelter, so we're going to make those available for folks doing that kind of exploratory planning work for that kind of capital project. We're also tracking the development process of those eligible PSH, permanent supportive housing projects that we're talking about. And we are also looking to find additional service providers to help us manage that TBRA program, or tenant-based rental assistance, since we do have a bit more in that bucket. So that is the update with home ARP. It is a significant chunk of change that is a very welcome addition to our toolbox, and just wanted to make sure that people who were a part of that planning process still are up to speed on what is going on with that. So thanks. You can send any questions in the chat.
Catherine, are there any questions? Yes. David.
This is David Lord, Catherine. Could
Hi,
you
David.
you briefly just tell us what tenant-based rental assistance is? What you mean by that?
Yeah, so tenant-based rental assistance, people, it works very similar to a housing voucher, where instead of the subsidy being attached to the unit, the household gets the subsidy, and they can take it to any apartment or landlord that will accept it. And even if they decide to move in 6 months, they can take that rental assistance with them to their other place. So it is good for up to 2 years. And in this program, home ARP, it's specifically for people exiting homelessness. So it is it functions almost as bridge housing.
Yes.
Is there a difference between the 10% allocation of the home grant funding to the TBRA rental assistance versus this home ARP program? Like
They
the fund
are,
have-
yeah. They are separate. It's the same program. TBRA work, it's the same rules, essentially, or so the program still works the same way. It's just this home ARP, it's just a different bucket of money. And it is designed for people exiting homelessness. Whereas the regular home program, it's a smaller amount of money and it's anybody who income qualifies. They don't have to be exiting homelessness. In fact, the home TBRA program that we have now is through Silver Key, and that is specifically for seniors who are facing displacement. So yeah, there are different, same program, just depending on who manages it, they can, prioritize their own priority populations.
Questions? Thank you, Catherine.
Yep.
So kind of in that same vein of other resources that are kind of outside of the official action plan for the 2024 HUD funds. This just gives you a sense of some of the other public and private financing tools and housing resources that we really try to leverage and work with so that our funds help these programs and these programs help our funds to create more affordable housing. The city allocates private activity bonds that help to develop affordable housing. The state allocates low-income housing tax credits, which are, both of those are vital financing tools for developing affordable housing. And then, of course, the Proposition 123 funds that I mentioned. Also, the city has instituted in the last couple of years 2 programs that have become, I think, a little bit models to other places. One is our Affordable Housing Development Fee Rebate Program. That is an incentive for developers that basically reduces their costs a little bit and allows the city to say, well, we want you to prioritize things that the city needs. Maybe it's senior housing or veteran housing or more sustainability. Those are kind of things that the developers basically sort of compete for to get those fee rebates. And we've also created an affordable housing sales tax rebate, again, to help reduce costs for developers if they are developing affordable housing. We do coordinate as much as possible with the El Paso County Housing Trust and also Housing Trust Fund and the Urban Renewal Authority. So next couple slides are very much about the public participation. It's a really important part of what we do. And in fact, it's mandated by HUD that we have a public participation plan that we have to follow. And so, as I mentioned before, we conducted 2 listening sessions before we even drafted the plan. We did a survey, we have some information about that on the slide. We have our weekly newsletter. This year, we've did 37 consultations with habitat organizations that we work with. Also, our new community development advisory committee brings more community leaders into the conversation. And then all the public comment we receive, we will have the city council vote. And then we also really try to coordinate with other planning and outreach efforts of the city. So for example, the city was doing a new transportation plan, and we wanted to make sure that that was serving low and moderate income communities and that we might be able to overlap some of the work that we do to help support people through that plan or vice versa. We do that with parks and cultural services for the community centers and then other plans. So thanks very much to Ray Medina. This is one little element of a survey. So we conducted a survey throughout this listening process. We had about 75 people who answered the survey. There were, I think, 4 questions, really trying to get at what are the most important needs? How do you think we should prioritize them? What other thoughts or ideas you have? And so Ray was able to basically take all of the answers to, this is the second question, how to prioritize those needs and really kind of quantify what people are telling us. I mean, you know, it's not necessarily a, you know, statistically, you know, done survey, but what this tells you is the folks who are responding, and we know a lot of them are service providers who work with the community, really said we want to prioritize affordable housing. We also really heard in those public hearings important rental assistance right now, because you know housing costs are going up. Folks who already have been in places with relatively low rent are having a harder time being able to stay there as rents are going up. And so it's kind of an example of how what we do hear from the public really impacts how we allocate the funds and priorities. And now we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think about, you know, what these priorities are, how we've done, how the plan allocates the funds. Do these sound like the right priorities? Do the annual goals make sense? What do you see that you know is working, that we can or should be funding more? What's not working? What do you think? Question? Yes.
Has the city prioritized buying land for housing?
The question is, has the city prioritized buying land? It is definitely something that has been part of our kind of research. You know, there's this, there are land trusts. And I think there might be somebody on here from our department who could answer this question better than I. But I think it's something that we have explored, but not, but in terms of the balance of how we can use the funds that we have, it has not emerged as one of the most effective ways to utilize the funds. Paul.
I was gonna say, Steve has his hand up, so.
Oh, yes, let's hear from
He's
Steve.
he's the right person to respond.
Thank you. Steve Posey is the city's chief housing officer. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, just with regards to prioritizing the purchase of land, the city actually works very closely with the Pikes Peak Real Estate Foundation. And they are a nonprofit entity that is set up specifically to purchase and hold land that can ultimately be used for the development of affordable housing. So that's the way that we are working that effort. And that also, because they are a 501c3 nonprofit, they're able to apply for grant funds directly from the state of Colorado that allows them to build up a bank of sorts in order to purchase that land and hang on to it until it's ready for development.
Thank you, Steve. This is Mark Trumbull. Was there, has there been much land then purchased at this point?
You know, that's a good question, Mark. I think that we can certainly circle back with Sam Clark over at the Real Estate Foundation and get a sense from him of how many parcels that they've currently got and what size and excuse me, how many units might potentially be developed as a result of that. We can pull that information together for you.
Well, not a problem. Thank you. We appreciate it.
So based on the funding goals that you guys have and the distribution of funds that you have allocated, you said that HUD has you have a specific metric that you have in order to identify how many people you're serving or to estimate how many people you're supposed to be serving. We're anticipating coming up on 500,000 people in Colorado Springs, and the numbers here are close to 4,000 at best. How is the city looking to aid in expanding that stopgap? Because 4,000 versus 500,000 is significant.
Yeah, absolutely. We recognize that there's more need than the funds we have can fill every year. And so that's partly why we make sure that we're positioning the city to be able to receive more funds. So that's both the Prop 123 funds. There are other funds through the state that we do leverage and that we work with, local nonprofits, housing developers to help them bring more funds in. There are, there are other grants, for example, through other federal agencies that sometimes can also be leveraged with the funds that we utilize. So I would say it's, we do look for and bring in more funds for those kind of things. We also help to support nonprofits and developers who are they're trying to do more work wherever we can support them, even without, funds, with our staff support, for providing, letters of support for,
Whatever that means, like,
yeah.
okay. So are you planning on utilizing that information as in like the 500,000 people and the growth in Colorado Springs in your upcoming 5-year plan? Is that what the 2024 goal is going to look like for what this
Yes,
5-year
so
plan is?
housing needs assessment is a big part of that plan. There's, market assessments that happen, looking at fair housing, all of those kind of things to understand really what is the need in our community, is part of, the kind of foundation for that plan. And then trying to say, well, with the funds that we have, what's the best way to meet the need?
Catherine's got her hand up.
Thanks. I just wanted to piggyback off of your response, Barb, in response to that question about the growing population. The long-term trend for these HUD entitlement dollars, it's going down per dollar amount per capita. So every year we just have to do more with less, and we just have to be more strategic with these specific entitlement dollars. But yes, to everything that Barb said, in order to fill that gap, we're always looking for other tools, whether they're local policies or state grant funds or other federal or private sources. We're trying to meet the need.
Thanks, Catherine. And I do see a question here in the chat. How does this plan sync with the city's strategic planning effort that kicks off this month, recognizing that this is a 2024 plan and the strategy planning is beyond that? I would basically just say that the Housing and Community Vitality Department staff and leadership are working closely with the mayor and the strategic solutions teams on housing and homelessness to make sure that those plans are coherent and cohesive moving forward. And Steve, if you have anything more to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, excuse me. Two things. One, specifically related to the question about how the plan syncs with the city's efforts. I can provide a little more context around that. There is a 2024 strategic doing plan that will be, excuse me, released by the mayor's office, I hope within the next week or so. And there is a specific section in that plan for 2024 that outlines some key initiatives and priorities around housing. So stay tuned on that one. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was that Catherine's absolutely right. The annual entitlement per capita entitlement has been trending downward over the years. But I think one of the things that's important to recognize is that a lot of times what we're trying to do is not solve the entire problem with these funds, but to use these funds in a way that really effectively leverages the efforts of the nonprofits that we're working with. Because we're not the only source of funding, for instance, for Silver Key or for Homeward Pikes Peak or for Catholic Charities. These are all very strong, effective nonprofits in our community that, you know, when we invest in programs and projects and activities that those nonprofits are carrying out, you know, we're taking $1 of federal money and then leveraging it to get hopefully, you know, $10 worth of impact.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. This is Diane. I wasn't sure if I could unmute myself, but it looks
You
like
can.
Yes, I see that. Thank you for the discussion. I appreciate it.
Let us know if you have a question. If someone online would like to unmute, you're welcome to as well. We have one in person, David.
David Lord, and I'm involved with a lot of different organizations like the Age-Friendly Pikes Peak and the Pikes Peak Housing Network and the advisory group. Back to your slide that you have up on the screen, do your goals make sense? I think the answer is yes. I think you've worked very hard to put together a plan. When I go and read all the detail, I'm amazed with the work that you have to put in there for HUD. As I think about it, obviously it's only very limited funds, as Steve commented. And I think as one of the things I appreciate, and I think the community's trying to, as we continue to move forward, is how we can collaborate and best leverage the funds as we move forward. I think it would be interesting during the year, if you're several years into the plan, again, for people who are applying, you might share some examples of projects that you feel have worked well. Just to sometimes give us ideas of how we might be able to better utilize the funds. Because I think sometimes for the average citizen, it's hard to understand the different buckets and get our minds, but sometimes if one perk that it could be. The other, it's interesting, and I realize it's sort of a separate thing, that the senior center, the senior community center, the new one, is a high priority. You're putting a lot of funding in it. It'll be a couple of years till it's done. But tying it back into housing, it has a lot of seniors. It's going to go through that. And maybe there's some, as the new facility gets done, where there's some resources that can be put there or some education programs to help seniors who are having problems. You know, I know seniors often are having all kinds of problems with rent and utilities. I think obviously one of the things that many of the nonprofits are trying to do is educate people that are having housing dilemmas. Are there, through budgeting and other opportunities, other funds that they could take advantage of? So I'm hoping maybe a little bit, because you're putting a lot of money in the senior center, thinking about how there might be some services there to help the seniors with housing and be a little bit of finding. But I appreciate the plan, appreciate what our community, many different people are trying to do to come together to best spend the money.
So, my next question is more centered on with your 2025 5-year plan, are you looking more towards creating sustainable impacts, as Catherine and Steve have said, and we've all felt it, especially in the nonprofit sector, that there is a significant decline in funding availability, and there is a lot of competition between nonprofits for the limited funds that are available. How do we, I guess, ensure that the projects that the city is identifying as a high priority are able to become sustainable. Like, for example, with the 2050 transportation survey that the city put out. Many of the questions were geared towards, should we increase the amount of roads that we have? Should we increase the amount of transportation that we have accessible versus sustainable options like increasing public transportation or walkable neighborhood opportunities, which is another thing that we've been hearing a lot throughout the communities. But is there going to be more of a focus on that in the upcoming 5-year plan with the growth that we're seeing in population and the decline in funding available for this need?
I think that could be a good guess for sure. I mean, I think issues around sustainability and how much access to transportation is key to housing being, being workable for especially low and moderate income people. Some of the work we do already supporting development does try to incentivize, working with being near, public transportation, and also some of the funds that we can help to support accessibility for public transportation. I think that will probably be one of the themes absolutely in the next consolidated plan. And if any other of our staff want to chime in, please do. I see I hand up. I can't tell who it is.
Yeah, I'll respond to that as well. We're all, I won't say eagerly anticipating, but we are looking forward to the Colorado legislative session that will be kicking off actually a week from today on January 10th. And we have some insight that the governor's office, once again, will be very focused on aligning transportation efforts with housing development, particularly affordable housing development. And I think that, we certainly will be tracking that very closely to see what sort of direction comes out of any legislative efforts on the Hill in Denver. And then how we are, as a community, perhaps already either meeting some of those overall goals, or whether or not there are some additional initiatives that we need to consider. We've also got some indication from the governor's office that there will be some incentive-based access to additional funding from the state for communities that do have good alignment between their transportation plans and their recognized housing needs. But we really don't know a whole lot more than that at this point.
Thanks, Steve. Thoughts from folks? Questions? Yes.
Mark from again. Is there any consideration? I know a lot of cities now have started to require that anybody doing housing development requires a certain number of affordable units as part of that housing development. Is that going to be any part of a plan, or is it already?
Let's see. Yeah. So Colorado Springs historically has not been a community that has mandated inclusion of affordable housing units in new multifamily development or new subdivisions. And I don't think that will change in the near future. However, I do think that we are actually looking at ways to incentivize inclusion of affordable units if the developer would like to access some additional rebates, for instance, or potentially some relief on density in the proposed development. But philosophically speaking, that would still be a voluntary and incentive-driven effort.
Is the mayor's office looking to change that in the upcoming year or plan?
Did you hear that question, Steve?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Steve, is there any way to incentivize more infill rather than, as we talked about, sustainable housing, as we talk about walkable communities? And I understand that a lot of apartments are being built downtown, but I think there's an incredible number or amount of land that might be available inside the city. Is there any incentives that you're currently working with really to make sure we're not growing so far outside of the, into the county?
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. And currently the fee rebate program that we offer does provide some additional points for infill development that does not put additional strain on the utility infrastructure. But I think that and I will say there is also some infill incentives that I believe are built into not Plan COS, but Retool COS, which was the recent rework of the entire land development code. So I think we're getting there, but certainly taking a closer look at that as we go forward, particularly if we want to incentivize infill development versus annexation or greenfield development, then that definitely needs to be on the table.
Thank you, Steve.
What does what will 2024's homeless and housing supports look like? And what does the anti-displacement toolkit look like?
Those are, especially the first one, a very, very big question. Catherine, if you're still on, can you answer the question about the anti-displacement toolkit?
Sure, I can take a stab at the
Maybe both of them, yeah.
supports. Yeah, there will be a competitive grant application, what we call NOFA, a Notice of Funding Availability, in the spring. And that will be for all of the services projects for ESG and CDBG. So what those will look like, it depends on what eligible projects come through our application portal. The priorities will inevitably be housing related, housing support related. But anything more specific, we are waiting for the mayor's homelessness solutions team process to wrap up for that. As for the anti-displacement toolkit, that is a partnership with Kono and some other folks. It's going to be piloted for 5 core central neighborhoods. Again, this is a partnership. We are focusing on ways that are the tools that we just described through CDBG, Home, and ESG, how they can be used strategically to help vulnerable residents in these 5 core neighborhoods, Mill Street, Hillside, Stratton Meadows, Nob Hill, and I'm missing one. How those neighborhoods can keep residents and make sure that there are still spaces for people. Excuse me, sorry. For people who of LMI means. And we'd like to make space for anti-displacement efforts for businesses as well. So there will be some sort of component, commercial component for that. So what it will look like, it will be a toolkit that we can immediately deploy through these tools. We also hope that there will be some ideas that come forward that the partnering organizations like Kono and the Colorado Springs Pro Housing Partnership can use and raise money on their own for to accomplish some of those goals. So we want it to be usable for everybody in those neighborhoods. And again, as this is a pilot, we'll see how that goes, and the ideas we'd be able to use it in all parts of the city eventually.
Is it going to be an application-based program, or like what exactly is the toolkit, or what is composed within the toolkit? Like, is it cash assistance? Is it direct funding to make sure that their 1 month is paid for, or whatever? Like, what is this toolkit?
So it will be about preserving housing that is already there, what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. Tools that can create more housing. We talked, someone there talked about infill. So how do we incentivize infill in those neighborhoods, and how can people who live in those neighborhoods be advocates and support new development that adds new inventory. This isn't about neighborhoods wanting to never change. It's about it's about figuring out how to preserve and add new housing units so people of all income levels can enjoy. So as the name suggests, a toolkit, it's just going to be a description of all the different strategies that we can deploy using grant funds, federal grant funds, any local tools that we can use to keep people there. And I can tell you, you asked what kind of programs we can offer. We described a little bit about what TBRA is. So how can we use the TBRA program in a neighborhood setting? So it's just about getting creative, learning about the tools that the city already has, and how do we make a place-based strategy using them. And also part of the public process with those 5 neighborhoods will be looking at what we aren't doing and really looking into the pros and cons of adding new policies or programs. What does it take to get those programs going? What kind of money and people power does that take? So I'm looking forward to just really working with the neighborhoods and figuring out how we can use the tools we already do have in a strategic way. But there will be some discussion of things that we don't yet have.
Thank you. Well, our time is almost up. There's one hand raised online, and there was one question in the chat that I thought we might be able to get to. Cheryl, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I wanted to make a comment about the infill. If you look at the zoning map in Springsview, there's a lot around the core area of the, downtown neighborhood, basically Old Colorado City, Mid Shooks Run, my neighborhood, Historic Uptown, which is kind of north of downtown, south of Cache. These are all a higher density R2. Even in my neighborhood, for which I'm the president, there's R4, R5, but it is tough, to with housing costs to potentially realize some of this zoning, right? Through ADUs, because R2s do have ADUs. And I don't know if that's considered a possibility to help in densification in areas that already allow it, but may not be able to afford it. There are a number of areas in Old Colorado City and in Midshooks, a lot of older owners that may or may not be able to afford to improve their properties, but there is a zoning that does allow some densification, but like I said, not a lot of it's not realized, and that might be something the group looks into, as a way of increasing housing. And so I assume when you're talking about increasing housing, you're talking rental ownership across the board, or is there anything specific you're looking at?
Well, it kind of depends on, which funds and what they go towards. So I would say yes, all of the above.
Okay.
To the extent we can.
Well, and there are like a number of historically designated areas, like Weber Wasatch Historic District. There, I'm sure, I believe there's a lot of historic districts in Old Colorado City that could get Colorado grants for rehabilitation. So if you're in a historic district, you can get 20%, tax. You can be relieved of Colorado taxes to pay 20% of a rehabilitation. So there's money kind of sitting out there, but it needs someone to bring it online and to help move it forward, because a lot of owners don't know about this kind of stuff. There seems to be money sitting around that could help in the densification quest, bringing up housing, because there are a lot of older houses that may or may not, the owners have the ability to bring them up online or to help with, not working pipes or, whatever. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that forward as something to think about for the group as well, because that's also quote unquote free money sitting out there.
Thank you. Well, it definitely fits into the idea of leveraging other funding and efforts that are out there. I really want to thank everyone again for being here. Again, here's the action plan and timeline where we're at. We will continue to take comments and suggestions and feedback on the plan until the end of the public comment period, and then it will be going to City Council. So also up here is my email address and phone number. If you're not already on our newsletter list, please do sign up. And if you have any other questions, again, just reach out, and we'd love to.
Barb, I just wanted to say that Mike Rood has his question in the chat, and Mike, we will get an answer for you on that.
Thank you. Yes, he asked about programs available for homeowners to build ADUs, and that's definitely something on our minds.
Oh, great. I would like to be kept involved with that, because in our neighborhood, there's a lot of opportunity for it, just like Old Colorado City, just like Midshooks, and it would be nice to know what programs are available for that.
Stay tuned, for sure.
Okay.
All right. I want to respect everyone's time. Again, really appreciate you spending an hour of your evening with us talking about all these important things at the city. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time and hearing from you again. Have a great evening, everyone.
How are you? I'm very well. Good to see you.
Good to see you. How's your
Thank you all.
project?
Oh,
Thanks.
Faith, about the first
Thank
building.
you.
I know, first building's about done, and I think we just got bridge financing for the second. We're good.
When you hope to open, maybe.